You can't just wait, throw stones at the monarchy and be a cynic about it, because it actually does fulfill a role and it is capable of renewal, like a family.
Is there anyone in this panel who could imagine something which could replace that sort of mystique that Aaron is talking about? Craig?
Well, I mean, I do think there's an element, as the question earlier as well, there is an element of celebrity about it. I'm not being cynical about that, saying it's just about celebrity there, but it is about somebody of high profile coming to Australia at that time. And I'm not to be cynical, but there would have been celebrities who could have come and set up spinal care centres and that, who would have got the same attention to it and set up the same kind of notion behind it. So I don't think it's not that they can't be replaced in that way, but I just think it's a ridiculous way. You've got to remember in the end that just because they're liked and people like to see them around doesn't make it necessarily a good head of state. I mean, it's a part of our constitutional forum. It's part of our actual constitution. So it's a very different question as, are they liked about it? It shouldn't be about when she dies, do we like Charles, do we like whatever. It should be about what is the best form of governance for us and what does the monarchy represent to Australia. And I think that's much more important. I mean, the reality is, Jen, it shouldn't be based on who's on the front page of women's magazines, because, Gen X likes the Kardashians. You don't see them being made the head of state, do you?
No. You can't compare the Kardashians to the royals. You can't even compare. Even if Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie got married tomorrow and not Kate and Wills, 2 billion people would never tune in.
But that doesn't mean they should be heads of state. Like, it's not a popularity contest. Who gets the biggest wedding?
But they're not just celebrities.
Let's give them power over our
They're not just celebrities.
No, they're not just
celebrities. It comes with an added weight, which is why there's the...
See, I think that the discussion kind of misses the point. The point is the Queen is the head of state of Australia. She is.
Well, no, she's not. The Governor-General is.
No, that's not right. That's not right. That is a fiction. That is a fiction.
No, you're arguing the fiction, and it's the only argument
Can I
you've
finish
got.
my point?
That's your problem. The only argument you've got is that.
She's the Queen of Australia. And as the Queen of Australia, she, symbolises, she embodies traditions that, are part of our political system. And the real problem is not that whether or not she's fit to be the Queen of Australia, because that's not what's in question here. The question for Australians is, what is the model that replaces the monarchy? And nobody has answered that question. And until somebody answers that question, it's, there's no point in asking questions about whether or not the monarchy is appropriate, because we have no alternative. And that is why the Republicans lost the vote. Because I'll just like to remind you, and many young people probably can't remember this, at the time, let me say, when Pauline Hanson stood for Parliament, she got 1 in 4 votes in Queensland. And in parts of Cape York, she got 40% of the vote. Out beyond the Great Dividing Ranges, she got most of the vote. And so if the model had been an elected head of the Australian state, we would have ended up with Pauline Hanson.
That assumes that most of the voters are beyond the dividing range, which they aren't.
Well, Australians voted down in the previous referendum, 1 person, 1 vote, because Australians are deeply suspicious of anything that the state puts to them.
There are only 2 ways a Republican proposal gets up in this country. One is if both sides of politics support it. You've got to have a leader of the coalition say to the leader of the Labor Party, we are with you in this. This is going to be a joint proposal. Referenda don't succeed without that, and this would be more difficult than most. The second one is for Republicans to accept the minimalist model. In fact, the most minimalist model there is, which is a simple amendment to the Constitution, a simple tweaking of the Constitution, which says the Governor-General shall be Australia's head of state. No talk of, and I'll tell you why it's not in a moment. No talk of Federal Republic of Australia, and no talk of a president. Just a simple amendment, a surgical incision in the Constitution that says the Governor-General shall be our head of state.
We'll come back to debate on that issue in a little while. First, I'd like to hear from a couple of our student debaters, and one of them has a question. Sophie O'Rourke.
Hi, I'm a 17-year-old Australian, and while I hold no grudge against the royal family, I feel absolutely no connection to them. And I find it bizarre and alarming that in our system of government, we recognise these foreigners as our head of state, while at the same time Aboriginal people aren't recognised at all in our constitution and system of government. And I think maybe it's time we grew up and we started discussing the real issues.
I just want to hear from Marcia first on that.
Well, you know, I agree with that young lady's view, absolutely, because, you know, even if the amendment that you're proposing there, Bob, were to succeed, we'd still have a racist constitution, you know. We'd still have the race power, we'd still have, you know, the history of the race power. And so then, you know, Australia would be a racist republic. So I think it's probably important to sort out that issue first before, you know, the Republican issue is back on the table. And one thing I would say is that I would not want to see the question about recognition of Indigenous people go to the voters with any other question, because that's what has caused every other referenda. 8 out of the 40-something have succeeded. The others failed because of Australia's cynicism and because more than one question was put to the people, especially in the referenda before last. So I don't want to see the questions go together, and I don't want to see the two questions associated with each other. I'd prefer to see the Indigenous questions sorted out first. I'd like to see racism removed from the Constitution, and then I think Australia should make up its mind about being a republic.
Amanda Vanstone, just pick up on the other part of Sophie's question, if you wouldn't mind. She says she feels absolutely no connection to the royal family, finds it bizarre and alarming that we recognise foreigners as our head of state.
Well, I think that's quite explicable for a young Australian and for many others. I mean, people who've come here from other countries and have a different religion other than the Anglican one would, in all possibility, feel the same way. I'm a bit disappointed to have people saying, oh, well, look, someone has to come up with a model. We all have to come up with a model. We were born by our own hand, and we have to find a model we're happy with. We can't just sit and wait. If we at least recognise, and I think we do know this, that eventually it's going to happen, then we all have a responsibility, not just the federal parliamentarians, all of us, to really acquaint ourselves with what the options are and to think about it. Now, in the end, I think the only one we will get first up is the one that Bob Carr recommends, or not necessarily recommends, but says is the most likely, and that's the minimalist model. I'm in favour of that myself. I don't see anything in calling our head of state president. I don't care what they're called. All I want is our constitutional arrangements to be totally Australian, and I don't mind about the names that you happen to use in doing that. So I'd be happy to see that. What I don't understand is the direct elect people. Having had personal experience of this, I can assure you, Australians are not always happy with the people they elect. You know, I mean, guys, you elect the politicians, then you hate them. What on earth makes these direct elect people think they're going to be happy with who they elect? I don't think they will be. I don't think they will be at all.
And yet that's what the vast majority of people wanted
but, well,
in the last referendum.
My former colleague on my left, geographically speaking at least, might know something about that. I was always suspicious that the monarchists were helping the direct elect people because,
Never.
you know, divide and separate. Well, you were the guys that said don't trust politicians, and you're now paying the price for that. Australia is paying the price for that because people believed it.
They're right to believe it.
But isn't the only way you're going to get a momentum, get a model, is if somebody who's in power is willing to stand up and say we need a republic now, and no one seems to be saying boo.
That is actually, let's bring Bob Carr on that, because I think it's notable that there are none of your federal colleagues on this panel tonight.
Well, there's no passion in this debate, and there isn't, because constitutional monarchies aren't wicked ways of running a political system. They tend to work quite well. It's a matter of whether you think there's a fulfilment of Australia's national destiny in doing to our constitution what we'd be doing if we were writing it today. And that is simply assuming that the head of state would be an Australian. Instead, the Constitution was written in the 1890s, and the Constitution was a hymn of praise to Queen Victoria. It was a product of its times. If we're writing the Constitution in the 1990s, if we'd done that, there wouldn't be a question of having anyone other than someone resident in Australia as our head of state. That's why I keep coming back to this simple proposition. I put it forward when I was Premier at the 1999 convention. A simple notion, it received no support whatsoever, that the Governor-General be Australia's head of state. It would have required one amendment instead of the 21 amendments required by the more elaborate approach that was ended up being taken by Republicans, and it raised all these disturbing issues of presidential powers analogies with other republics that simply persuaded Australians there's too much risk in going that path.
Yes, go ahead, Craig.
Can I just say that this notion that there's nothing bad about a constitutional monarchy, I think there are some bad things about it, to be honest. And it's not just the fact that you can't relate to it when you're young. I actually think there's some terrible things in it. I mean, to be in a country that thinks of itself as being egalitarian and then have this link to this hereditary system is ridiculous. The fact that, for instance, you cannot succeed to being the head of state, to being the Queen or King in England if you are a Catholic or if you've married a Catholic is ridiculous. The fact that the woman will not give precedent to become the King or Queen unless they have, no other male siblings there. Like, that is sexist, it's anti-religion, it's fundamentally wrong in so many ways. And can you imagine if right now anybody here proposed a system where in government they said, well, you can't have a Catholic. I mean, maybe with Tony Abbott as a Catholic that would work, but it's ridiculous it's ridiculous. What actually is represented by this ancient institution is reprehensible in so many ways.
This ancient institution gave me, as a young girl growing up in Australia, a female role model leading something long before we elected one.
But would you accept if it was said that, that you could not have, you couldn't become the TV reporter unless a TV reporter for Channel 10 if there was a son to Bronwyn Bishop. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Let's actually hear from a young person who does think the monarchy is a good idea. And once again, one of our young debaters. We'll go to Ben Brooks.
Yes, hi. I'm an 18-year-old who actually adores the monarchy, so I'm a bit of an anomaly. But I think it's because many people in Australia, and particularly in my age group, are beginning to see the nation and government as really functional things which should get on with the day-to-day and leave pageantry to, other more ancient cultures. Now, I beg to differ, but under any new model, do we really need a head of state separate from our head of government?
I've just got to ask what you're holding there, Ben, because...
I keep the British tourism industry alive.
I've just noticed. Okay, all right, let's go back to Bob Carr on that question.
It's a good question. It seems to be, however, that you do, for those occasions when there's a close election result and someone needs to perform the role of arbitration and call on both sides to make the case that they could marshal a majority in the House of Representatives. It's hard to imagine... It's a very good question, but it is hard for us to imagine a constitution without a head of state located in it above the area of party political contest.
And Bob, can I just ask a quick question here? Why is it that politicians appear far more terrified about the idea of an elected president than the public
For this reason, I mean, it's easy to get cheers by saying we must have a president and that person must be elected by the people. Cheers all round. Let me put this to you. We've got a parliamentary system of government. The government is formed by the party or the coalition of parties that mobilises a majority in the House of Representatives. Power, executive power, resides with a cabinet that lives in the legislature, that sits in the legislature. To impose on that system an elected head of state, separate from the parliament, with the reserve powers the Governor-General has at the present time to command the armed forces, for example, and to dismiss prime ministers, is to create a bifurcated or two-headed executive, to have another source of power. So there's a Prime Minister elected by the people, and there's a Governor-General who says, hang on, you've got these policies on climate change or on taxation. I've been elected with my own mandate. And all of a sudden, Australian government devolves into a contest of ultimatums and vetoes because executive power is divided. Beware of the siren song here of an elected presidency. Think deeply about what parliamentary government or prime ministerial government means and has meant for this country.
I'm going to interrupt you because I actually do have a question on this subject. It's from Thomas for Marcus.